You know, I tend in my life to accumulate stuff. I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes stuff and having stuff isn't the best for you. Sometimes it can be hard to let it go. Sometimes it has a greater influence on you than you think it should. Really, we're supposed to hold the things of this life very loosely. And we see that in the Bible. We see exhortations in the Bible not to love the world, not to love the things of the world, not to hold on to our things very tightly. Even that verse in Ecclesiastes that warns us that sometimes that we have too many things to our own hurt. And the Bible has a lot of different verses and lessons about this. And one of the things that I love about the Bible is that some of the lessons, you get real simple verses, like the one in Ecclesiastes that says you can have stuff to your own hurt. But then you have other lessons that are buried much more deeply that almost become like a treasure hunt. But they tell you the same lesson. What that tells me about the Bible is I'm never going to exhaust it. I don't know how many, I don't care how long I spend reading it or studying it, or you do. There's always going to be these nifty little lessons buried in the scripture. And one of the really neat lessons about holding your stuff loosely, being willing to let go of your stuff, holding the will of God as the most important thing in life, and certainly more important than your stuff, is buried in the book of Joshua. It takes a little effort, a little study to understand and see. I want to walk you through it, and it deals with Caleb. And let's go get some background on Caleb, some understanding of him. When Moses and the children of Israel came out of Egypt, and they're in the Sinai, they were camped at Kadesh-barnea, which is just south of the Promised Land. And so here they are in Kadesh-barnea. Moses had never been in the Promised Land personally. And so he wanted to send spies in to spy out the land. And so in Numbers chapter 13, what Moses does is he takes the 12 tribes of Israel and he sends one man from each tribe into the land of Israel. Now, two of those people from the tribe of Ephraim was Joshua, Moses' assistant. From the tribe of Judah was Caleb. And so the 12 go off into the Promised Land. They spy it out for 40 days, and they come back. And when they come back, lo and behold, 10 of the 12 men were frightened by what they saw in the Promised Land. They saw the Nephilim, the fallen race of giants there, these giant men, cities that were walled and powerful, armies that were well-armed. And they were frightened, and they even made up a lie that we don't want the land. The land's a land that eats up the inhabitants thereof. And Joshua and Caleb stood faithful, and they said, no, it's a great land, and we can conquer that land. And Joshua and Caleb were faithful. And so now, by the time we get to Joshua chapter 14, which is where we're going to pick up the record, now Israel has wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. They've come out of the wilderness. They have moved into the Promised Land. They've been fighting wars in the Promised Land now for years against the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Amorites. They've been fighting all these wars. And now the wars are close to coming to an end. And Moses, God had spoken through Moses and said that as a reward for their faithfulness, Joshua and Caleb were going to get their own little land area in the Promised Land. And so here, Caleb now in Joshua chapter 14 is talking to Joshua about getting his land area. And so verse 6 of Joshua chapter 14 says, when the children of Judah drew near to Joshua in Gilgal, Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite said to him, you know the word that Yahweh spoke to Moses, the man of God, concerning me and concerning you, Joshua, in Kadesh-barnea. Verse 9, Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land on which your foot has walked will be an inheritance to you and your children forever, because you have fully followed Yahweh, my God. And that's true. Joshua and Caleb were the two spies that gave a true report and fully followed Yahweh. verse 10, now behold, Yahweh has kept me alive as he spoke these 45 years from the time that Yahweh spoke this word to Moses while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now, behold, I am 85 years old today. And that's an amazing statement for Caleb to say, Yahweh has kept me alive, because Caleb was a warrior. He was a fighter. He was, in the forefronts of the battles. And Israel in the wilderness, in the Sinai, they fought the Amalekites, and then coming around the Transjordan, they fought the Amorites, and they fought the Moabites, and then they crossed into the Promised Land, and they fought the Jebusites, and they fought the Canaanites, and they fought the Amorites, and they fought the Hivites, and they fought others. And Caleb went through war after war after war, and this is hand-to-hand combat stuff. And so years and years later, he's still alive. And look what he says about himself in verse 11. As yet I am as strong today I was in the day that Moses sent me. And so he says he has strength for war in verse 12. So now give me this hill country about which Yahweh spoke, for you yourself heard on that day. So Caleb says, give me this hill country. And that's really bold on Caleb's part, because it wasn't fully conquered yet. And Caleb's going to have to do some work to get his city. Verse 13, Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, as an inheritance. Now, Hebron was an important city. Abraham, for example, had lived there. And so Caleb says, okay, you get the city of Hebron. You've been faithful. You've been faithful to fight now for over 45 years. And you've been right there in the battle for us. And you get the city of Hebron. Not that it was, a nice present like a Christmas gift. It's all wrapped up and has a bow, and here you get Hebron. It was still occupied by the Anakites, these giants. And Caleb, if he wanted it, he had to go fight for it. And so, in fact, verse 15 says, now the name of Hebron before was Kiriath-arba, which is the city of Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, and the land had rest from war. And the Anakim were part of the race, the fallen race of the Nephilim that we read about in Genesis chapter 6. They were the men who were giants. In Joshua chapter 15. So in Joshua 14, we have Caleb taking Hebron, and it was such an important victory. And that the fact that God was keeping his promise to Caleb was so important that God's going to repeat it and give us more details in chapter 15. So he told us about it in chapter 14. He tells us about it again with more details in chapter 15. In chapter 15, verse 13, the text tells us, and to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, he, Joshua, gave a portion among the children of Judah, according to the commandment of Yahweh to Joshua, namely Kiriath-arba, which is Hebron, named after Arba, the father of Anak. And Caleb drove out the three sons of Anak, Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai, the children of Anak. Now, these are Nephilim. They're part of the fallen race. They're part of the giants. Caleb going in and driving out these three is like killing Goliath, who was over 9 feet tall, and two of his brothers. This was a tremendous act of bravery and confidence and trust in Yahweh on Caleb's part. And God gave him that city, and he's going to go in and take it. And he did. And he didn't stop there. It says from there he went up against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir before was Kiriath-sepher. So the tribe of Judah gets their land, and Caleb gets his city in the land of Judah, the city of Hebron. And as we go through now, we read more about Joshua, the book of Joshua, and the other tribes begin to get their land: Naphtali, Asher, Benjamin, Dan. The various tribes get their land. And we get to Joshua chapter 21. Well, Joshua chapter 21 is about the Levites. Well, all the tribes like Judah, Simeon, Benjamin, Asher, Naphtali, Issachar, all those tribes got a tribal land area. But the Levites' job was to minister to the tabernacle. And so God said, I don't want them having a tribal land area. I'm going to give the Levites cities throughout all of the tribal areas. In fact, I'm going to give the 12 tribes, I'm going to give them 48 Levitical cities. And I'm going to scatter them around Israel. And that was because the Levites were the ones that were really in charge of knowing God's word and knowing how the tabernacle worked, knowing how the priestly system worked, knowing how the sacrifices worked. And they were teaching priests. They were people that would teach the Israelites the word of God in the Torah so that Israel could be obedient. So God wanted those ministers to be scattered throughout the land rather than all just in one little tiny tribal area. So you got to give them cities. So now in Joshua chapter 1, we're going to give the Levites cities. And it says in verse 1 of Joshua 21, then the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites came near to Eleazar the priest. Eleazar was the high priest at the time. And to Joshua the son of Nun, and to the heads of the fathers' houses of the tribes of the children of Israel. And they spoke to them at Shiloh in the land of Canaan, saying, Yahweh commanded by Moses to give us cities to live in, with their pasture lands, for our livestock. Well, that was really true. You know, God had said that to Moses to make sure the Levites had cities. We go back to Numbers chapter 35 when that occurred. Numbers chapter 35, verse 1, Yahweh spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan River at Jericho, saying, command the children of Israel that they give to the Levites of their inheritance, of their possession, cities to live in. And you are to give to the Levites pasture lands around the cities. So Moses said, hey, you guys are going to take some of your cities and you're going to give them to the Levites. So the Levites have 48 different cities to live in. And everybody knew that was coming. Everybody knew that out of the tribes of Israel, the Levites were going to get cities in those tribes. Now we go back to Joshua chapter 21 because it's time to distribute those cities. In Joshua chapter 21, verse 3, so out of their own inheritance by the command of Yahweh, the children of Israel gave these cities with their pasture lands to the Levites. And then verse 4 says, we're going to talk about the cities in the tribal area of Judah and Simeon and Benjamin. Well, whose city, Hebron, is in Judah? Caleb's. And so verse 8 says, the children of Israel gave these cities with their pasture lands by lot to the Levites. And everybody knew when the lot was cast by the high priest that the way it came up, that was Yahweh's decision. One of the reasons there wasn't any infighting among the Israelites when the tribal lands were divided was they were divided by lot, and everybody could look and see this is Yahweh's decision. This is God's decision. This is where he wants us. Let's take what God has given us and make it into something great. And so people knew this was God's decision. And so this is coming up for Lot, just as Yahweh commanded by Moses. Verse 9, they gave out of the tribe of the children of Judah and out of the tribe of the children of Simeon these cities that he called by name. Verse 10, and they were for the children of Aaron, of the tribe families of the Kohathites, who were of the children of Levi, for theirs was the first lot. So these are the Levites, the Kohathites, the priests. Verse 11, they gave them, Verse 11, they gave them Kiriath-arba, after the father of Anak, which is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah, with its pasture lands. Wait a minute. I thought God gave that to Caleb. Now God's giving it to the Levites. That's God's decision. And what I love about this lesson is what you don't see in the record. Because Caleb was there and he knew that the decision to give Hebron was Yahweh's decision. It was the will of God. Now, what we might have expected is Caleb throwing a giant hissy fit. What do you mean? God gave that land to me. I risked my life taking that country. I fought those three big giants. That city belonged. You don't see any of that. See, Caleb was a man that understood what it meant to not hold this life too tightly, not hold on to your stuff so tightly that you can't let it go. And Caleb had other cities in the immediate area and other lands in the immediate area, and he understood it wasn't like he was going to be without a place to live. He just didn't get Hebron. God was giving that to the priests. That ended up being a really good decision from a spiritual point of view, because then David was anointed king in Hebron. It was right in the city of the priests that David was anointed king. And that was huge. Early on in the book of 2 Samuel, 1 Samuel, that David is anointed king. Then 2 Samuel, it's amazing. And so what do we see here? We see Caleb, and he could have been so resentful and so hurt and just have this ruin his life. And instead, he just absolutely gave in to the will of God and said, that's the will of God. And if that's the way God is moving things, then things are going to be fine for me. See, if you're doing the will of God, things are going to turn out fine. They may not be an easy pill to swallow at first, but if you're doing the will of God, things are going to turn out fine. They really will. And did things turn out fine for Caleb and his progeny, his descendants? Yes, they did. Sure they did. And it turned out fine for Israel that Hebron got to be a city of the priests. And it certainly went well for David then and his kingdom. This decision and this movement of God. But what a great lesson to be just kind of buried away, where you have to pay attention to the geography and the history that Hebron is given to Caleb, and then he fights, and then he takes it, and then God gives it away. And what a great lesson for us to see how Caleb reacted to that. And what a great model for us that we're to just believe that if God moves in a certain way in our life, even if it isn't exactly what we'd want to do right from the start, that we know that things will work out for the best. And as for our stuff, hanging on to stuff is a perennial problem. It's not like it went away with Joshua. So Jesus Christ, in Luke 12, verse 15, he says, and Jesus said to them, talking to the audience around him, take care, be on guard against every form of greediness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things that he possesses. And that's exactly right. Our life does not consist in what we possess. Our life consists in how does God's work and love show up in our life? How are we pleasing and serving God? How are we blessing others? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor like yourself. That's where our life sure consists. God bless you. Thanks so much for watching this video. And if you'd like to contribute to making more videos like this, then please do so at truthortradition.com/donate. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button below so that you'll get notices of future videos. God bless you.